Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. Today we have the privilege of hearing from Diane Thayer, who is actually the daughter-in-law of Nancy Thayer, our resident. And she's going to be talking about Fairview Church, the history and restoration of it, and a little bit about some genealogy too. So please help me welcome Diane.
I deal with old things, and wood and nails and technology is not my strong point. It took us about a half an hour here tonight to get things straightened out, so we're a little frazzled here, but it's good. I am Diane Hayes Thayer. I am the daughter-in-law of Nancy Thayer here, and I have lived my entire adult life here in Iowa City, but I was born and grew up in a little town about an hour south of here called Wapello. And Wapello is the county seat of Louisa County, and that's where this story, this passion, this project takes place. Now, to give you a little context, you can see Iowa City there. This is the southeast quadrant of Iowa. You can see Iowa City, you can see Wapello, and right where my big red arrow points is where this project takes place. It's in the southernmost tier of Louisa County. And here it is again in a very old map. Now, my sister and I currently spend a lot of time in cemeteries. We are working on a genealogy project, but back in 2020, we were just kind of getting started with that project. And we were taking flowers over Memorial Day weekend to the graves of our parents, our grandparents, and great-grandparents. And we had finished that up and decided that we would go visit some cemeteries that perhaps we had not been to maybe since our childhood. And the first one that we chose to go to was Fairview Church and Cemetery. Now, I have since learned that technically there is a difference between a cemetery and a graveyard. A cemetery is a burial ground that is not associated with or affiliated with a church. A graveyard is a burial ground that is adjacent to or affiliated with a church. So what you technically see here is Fairview Church and its adjacent graveyard. Now, when I find a, oh yes, could we turn the lights down? Maybe even a little more, is that possible? Or is this as dark as we can get it? Ooh, that's a little better, thank you. Now, when I find an abandoned building, the first thing that I like to do is to see if I can get in. Sometimes I will even ask permission. But on this particular day, I walked up to the front door, and not only was it unlocked, but it was ajar. So I figured, invitation accepted. And this is what I found. Water damage, debris everywhere, the ghost silhouettes of things that had been on the wall. You can see the cross up there in the front and what looks like perhaps a table of some sort underneath. Over to the left, you can see a couple rectangles on the wall. There was a huge pile of hymnals on the front pew. They all live at my house now for the time being. But those hymnals dated from the early 1900s up until about 1950, 1960. They were very old ones. There was and is a piano and what was once just a stunningly beautiful pump organ. Unfortunately, that pump organ was sitting directly under the biggest hole in the roof and is beyond all hope of restoration. What we do hope to do with it, however, is to, I'm going to say salvage it for parts, but keep it and see what we can make from some of the little elements of that organ, because it is just a stunningly beautiful piece. There were animal droppings all over the church. I will let you just imagine what it smelled like in there. A bird had built a nest in one of the lights, and one other light had been broken out. You can see it to the back left. there was also one window that had been broken just to the left of that light. That was the only window that was broken. We're going to talk a little bit more about the windows in just a bit. You can also see on the back wall there is a rack that had church materials and Sunday school materials in it. That dated back to the 1980s. It looked as if they had had one final event there, probably a Christmas event based on some of the debris that I found, after which the church was simply locked and left. Outside, there are these curved architectural elements that flank the front stairway, front steps going into the front door, I should say. The one in the foreground here of this picture was and is in good shape. The one in the background was in kind of bad shape when we found it. Subsequently, it has completely rotted away. What little paint remained was chipped and flaking. There were weeds growing on the front steps. You can see it down by the door there. And the roof was absolutely no longer able to do what a roof is intended to do. But I also found this. Some of the most beautiful stained glass windows that I have ever seen, and with the exception of the one that I mentioned, they were in pristine condition. This Palladian style window on the north face says at the bottom, "In memory of fathers and mothers, 1905. And a companion piece on the south wall says, "Fairview Young People, 1905. Now, we know who these young people were. We have a list of the names of the people who gave their money to purchase this window. And though these young people are long gone, their tribute remains. And if things like this are lost or destroyed, they are gone forever. So, what do we do next?" I enjoy photography as a hobby, and all of the pictures that you will see tonight are mine, with the exception of the couple drone shots. And the drone pictures were taken by a high school classmate of mine, and we have kind of reconnected as a result of this project. So, a few days later, after this fateful discovery, I returned to Fairview intending to make a full photographic documentation in case Fairview could not be saved. So I came down, I photographed everything on the outside that I possibly could. I photographed everything on the main floor, and then it was time to go down to the basement. Basements are always a little bit scary. So the access to the basement is immediately to the right as you walk in the front door. You can also see the access to the bell tower there at the top of that picture. Now, to go down to the basement, you're going to go down a short, narrow flight of steps through a door and into the basement, or what would have been the fellowship hall or the social area. Now, we see restoration of the basement as phase 2 of our restoration process, but I want to give you just a tiny little tour of this room. You can see to the right, there's a big dark hulking rectangle there. That is the very old, very not workable furnace. And immediately to the right of that is a small room that would have been the coal room or the wood room. Now, to the back of this picture is what would have been the kitchen area. And I think it probably was a really totally adorable kitchen at one point. It's not now, but we hope that it will be again sometime. There is also an old stove and an old refrigerator in the kitchen. And I want to tell you a little story about the refrigerator. Idle curiosity, you wonder if there's anything in there. So I opened up the refrigerator. It is absolutely packed with paper cups, paper plates, paper napkins, anything that you would need for a big social event. There is also a box of Arm & Hammer baking soda in the refrigerator. Pretty sure it has long since expired. So in the meantime, I received an email from what I will call a long-lost relative. He is a second cousin once removed of mine, and years ago we had kind of worked on a genealogy project, but had kind of drifted apart. But he had emailed about something else. His name is John. And we got to talking, and John and his wife Nancy actually live in Davenport, but they, like me, have a family farm down in Wapello in Louisa County. And so we were talking, and I said, you know, I think I might be coming to Wapello a little bit more often because I found this church that I think needs to be saved. And if you can have a pregnant pause online, there was a pregnant pause. And they came back on and they said, we think we found the same church. So it was at that point that the Fairview Preservation Group was born. Now, here's a quick picture of the originals of us. From left to right, that is my husband, Nancy's son there, and then me, and then Nancy Hayes, and my second cousin once removed, John Hayes. Now, at this point in time, anytime that you would walk into the church, it sounded like rolling waves going from one end of the building to another, over and over and over again. The sound would just like envelop the entire room. And I do believe that the entire population of Louisa County raccoons was living in the walls of Fairview Church. So, enter Big Papa of Big Papa's Nuisance Animal Control out of Muscatine. And Big Papa said, I love projects like this. I think they are important. I would like to volunteer my services to relocate these animals to a more suitable habitat. It's going to take a minute, he said, because there's a lot of them. It's going to take a minute, but we're going to get this done. And you know what? It did take a minute, but we did get this done. And I am now pleased to say that when you walk in Fairview, it is, as they say, as quiet as a church mouse. Fairview was established in 1855. The current building that you see was built in 1905, and they had regular Sunday services there until the early 1980s, at which point the church was locked and left, until two women from Wapello resurrected the church to a new beginning in 1998. And they held periodic special event services then until the early 2000s, at which point the church was once again locked and left. So the Fairview Preservation Group thought that the time was right to see if there was community support for yet another chapter in the life of this little building. So we put the word out, and on a Sunday afternoon in November, with no heat in the church, we packed the place. And following an afternoon of discussion, we found support for the restoration and preservation of Fairview Church to be overwhelmingly positive. So, what do we do next? We are pursuing a listing on the National Register of Historic Places. But that is a multi-step, research-intense process. So thanks to a grant written by the Louisa County Historic Preservation Commission, we were able to hire a preservation research specialist. She's actually based out of Coralville here. She's wonderful. And we hired her to do the necessary research, write the nomination, just guide us through this entire process. And her findings show that Fairview Community Church is eligible for the National Register of Historic Places based on criterion C, architectural significance. And that is because of this person right here, HOPs, shown here with his wife, Clara. Now, HOPs took a correspondence course in architecture and became a very prominent, very prolific architect, not only in Wapello, but in Louisa County and all of southeast Iowa. And the reason that he plays such a significant role in our nomination process, 3 reasons. In the early 1900s, it was unusual for a small country church to utilize an architect. It is even more unusual at this point in time that we would know who that architect was. And it is almost unheard of that we would have the blueprints that the architect drew for the building, which we do. Our nomination has been filed, and at 10:45 a.m. on June 9th, we will know whether or not we have achieved National Register of Historic Places status. In the meantime, a woman that I had gone to school with, she was 2 years ahead of me, but Wapello is a little town, everybody knows everybody. She approached me and she said, you know, HOPs was my great-grandfather, and I would like to work on this project with you. So we now have a direct link between our Fairview Preservation Group and the architect for this building. Her name is Peggy. Peggy has become the treasurer of our Fairview Preservation Group, and we absolutely could not be doing this project without her. So 1 year after my fateful discovery, we had a cleanup day. We had restroom facilities. We put the word out. We had about a dozen people that showed up for the day, and we put temporary patches on the worst holes in the roof. We cleaned. We put buckets, a kiddie pool. I think there's even a kiddie litter pan there. We put it under the worst hole in the roof, hoping to minimize much additional damage to the floor. We had a few people who came and said, you know, I am not able to help clean, but I wanted to be here. And they spent the afternoon talking, getting reacquainted, kind of reliving the glory days of Fairview. And you know, the more I think about it, isn't that what projects like this and spaces like this are really for, if not to connect people? And at the end of that cleanup day, this little building looked better than she had looked for years. We had Fairview open for Memorial Day weekend, and from Sunday through Monday, we had over 30 people stop in as they came to the graveyard, which we thought was really good for a small country church and its little adjacent graveyard. And it is our intent that Fairview will always be open on Memorial Day weekend, just as a quiet place for people to stop in. Now, nomination to the National Register of Historic Places requires proof of a clear title of ownership, and we did not have that. We had a deed, but the deed listed the owner as Fairview Community Church, and that organization, that congregation was no longer in existence. So we worked with the Louisa County attorney, and we came up with a plan whereby our organization would come under the umbrella of an existing 501c3 nonprofit organization, who would then assume ownership of the building, at least for the duration of the restoration process. That was easier said than done, and I'm just telling you, it was not even that easy to describe. But we met a lot of really fabulous people along the way. And on December 30th, 2021, the single remaining officer of the Fairview Community Church, seen seated here in the center, Janice Westfall, signed the deed over to Hometown Pride of Louisa County. And I cannot say enough good things about this organization and the support that they have given our project. Now, we knew that once we got all of our ducks in a row, the first thing that we needed to do was to get a new roof. We needed to shore up the exterior in order to preserve the interior, protect the interior. So after months of trying to nail down, yes, pun intended, a roofing contractor, we found one that we thought was a good match for our project in Carl Buster and his construction company. I wrote my first ever grant application, which was accepted by the Historic Resource Development Program, which is part of the Iowa State Historical Society. We received matching funds from my previously long-lost cousin, now a very, very dear friend. And just this past August, Fairview got her new roof. I'm going to show you some before and after pictures here. Here's the north side. You can see the big hole there at the lower right-hand corner. This is the before picture. And here's the after picture. Now here's the south side before, hardly any shingles at all. I want to point out a couple more things. You can see that there is a gutter that runs across some of the architectural detail there. Pretty sure that's not what HOPs had in mind when he designed this building. So we did include new gutters and new downspouts as part of our proposal or grant request and so forth for this project. At the same time, Peggy, the great-granddaughter of the architect, stepped forward and said, obviously, Fairview needs a new coat of paint. My husband and I would like to take care of that. So they made that happen. We got our new gutters, we got our new roof, and here's what it looks like now. Yeah, it's so wonderful to just see the transformation that has already happened. Now, something I haven't talked about yet are our outhouses. We have 2 of them. And though I would not recommend using them, nor do we intend to make them usable, they are part of the history and part of the story of Fairview. And so they will remain with their new roofs and their new coat of white paint. For much of the life of Fairview Church, there was a one-room schoolhouse that was right across the gravel road. And this schoolhouse was called Victory Schoolhouse, and my grandmother went to Victory, and it continued to hold classes until 1954. There is Victory when it was in use. And there is Victory in 2008, shortly before it was demolished. Now, I grudgingly acknowledge that not everything can or should be saved, but I cannot help but think what a priceless historic crossroads we could have had that tells such a story if we could have saved Victory School along with Fairview Church. But you do what you can, so we move ahead. Remember that rotted out front element? As I give this presentation, it is being rebuilt and replaced. There were a couple support beams in the bell tower that also needed to be replaced. Those are being done right now also. It's wonderful to see this coming to fruition. Carl Buster, who did the roof, is also working on this. We truly did find a gem in this construction company. As I previously stated, Fairview was established in 1855 when William and Patience Skull gave 1 acre of land for the establishment of a church. That church was built in 1855, but in 1900, a summer windstorm blew through the church to the extent that it expanded the walls, making it no longer safe to be in the building. So they dismantled the church. They hired HOPs to design and build a new church. And that new church was built in 1905 on the footprint, on the foundation of that original church, using much of the original materials. And you can see those original materials in the bell tower here on the inside of it. Yes, there is still a bell, and yes, it does still work. There you can see the bell up in the bell tower. When Fairview was built, there were tall rectangular windows immediately underneath those Gothic arches. And keeping in mind that Fairview was built in 1905, we know that those windows were covered in 1914 or 1915. What we don't know is why they were covered. And we may never know. That's a mystery we've not been able to find any information on. But it is our intent at some point in the restoration that we uncover those windows again. In the meantime, our summer projects, in addition to rebuilding the front there, we have a gentleman, his name is David Shaw. He's actually from Coralville, and his father was pastor of Fairview in the 1970s. And he has volunteered his skills to refinish the interior woodwork. So we're getting started on that. It is our intent, and we have an estimate, to bring electricity back to Fairview that requires rewiring. Hopefully we can get that done. If we can get electricity back, then we can work year-round, because I'm just going to tell you, it gets chilly and dark in there in the wintertime. But we are hopeful for that. All of that, of course, costs money. So in early June, we plan to launch a capital campaign. This is what Fairview looked like on the inside in the 1970s. This is what Fairview looked like when it was built in 1905. Now, the Fairview Preservation Group and everyone who is working with us has so many ideas and so many plans of events and things to do and gatherings to hold to keep this little church, this little building, loved and used for many decades into the future. And we hope that as this restoration process continues, we hope the community will be pleased, and we hope the ancestors will be pleased. I have brought with me, for anyone who would like one, let me pull this out, some of our brochures. This actually has the address of the church if you're out for a afternoon drive someplace. It's about an hour and 15 minutes away. You can drive by. I will just leave these up here. You are welcome to take one. What questions do you have for me? Yes.
Was the church affiliated with any denomination?
Yes, the church was originally a Methodist church, and in its later years, it became a non-denominational community church. Yes.
What are the things on top of the bell tower?
They are called crenellations, and it's simply an architectural detail. I have noticed, if you look at First United Methodist Church downtown sometime, they have similar crenellations on the top of that church. And I have learned, one of my brother-in-law, one of Nancy's sons, is an architect out in Portland, Oregon. And so I've learned a lot about architecture through him. And he said one of the things that is so unique about this particular church is that it is a variety of architectural styles that are mixed into one building, which he said was common and was kind of the fad or the style in the early 1900s. Yes?
Where did you find the blueprints?
Where did I find the blueprints? The great-granddaughter had actually the blueprints for the church, but we have an extensive collection as well of blueprints by this same architect. And those were found when a building was about to be burned and destroyed at the Wapello elevator. And someone who worked there was interested in history and genealogy, and he said, I'm going to go out and look and just make sure there's nothing in there of any value. And he found this whole treasure trove of blueprints, and so he saved those, and they are in good keeping now. Yes?
What's the condition of the interior furnishings, the pews and so on?
What's the condition of the interior pews? They're in pretty good shape. In fact, we are in discussion about whether or not to actually refinish them. They are in good enough shape. There's a couple that just the ends have suffered some water and sunlight damage, but by and large the pews are in good shape. There's another question right behind. Yes?
The windows seem to be particularly beautiful.
Yeah.
And I'm curious as to how they stayed intact all that time. How many of them were not, how many were broken?
Sure.
And then is there a certain style, I don't know enough about it, but they seem so beautiful. Is there a certain name for that particular pattern that's on them?
I can't tell you that. That is still in my research that I want to do. The windows at some point in time, and I don't know when this happened, perhaps in the 1980s, but on the outside there was a protective window that was placed over the stained glass, and I'm sure that is what has saved the windows. But they are fascinating, and I just haven't had enough, I've been concerned with other things. I never thought I was going to do this. I mean, this has always interested me, but I never thought I would actually do this. So I'm learning as I go, and I do want to do some research on the windows because they are just beautiful.
And it would be really interesting to find out whose idea it was to protect them that way.
Yes. Yes. That was a smart person, whoever it was. Yes. Yeah.
Do you know what happened to the records from the church?
I do know what happened to the records of the church. So at one time, I want to say this was in the 1950s, the records were inadvertently destroyed. And I don't know how that accident happened, but I do know that it did happen. And so in the early 1960s, they actually reorganized the church. So we do have lists of the charter members of the reorganization, but anything back before about 1960, we do not have those records at all. There was a woman who in 1955 wrote a little memoir of the church and its first 100 years, from 1855 to 1955. So we do have that, which does give us some hard facts, but it also gives us kind of a little glimpse of what the people were like. It refers to Mother Sprinkle always sat in this particular pew. And the names, Mother Sprinkle is actually buried in this graveyard there. I wish that someplace, maybe sometime, some record from earlier dates would surface. I'm not optimistic on that though. Yes?
Who has title to that now? Is it the Historical Society or is it the church?
It's actually owned now by Hometown Pride of Louisa County. And our agreement is that they will continue to hold the title to it for the duration of the restoration. They may choose to continue to own it. We may enter into a partnership with the Louisa County Historic Society. We have other options, but that gives us time to take care of that. But it is Hometown Pride of Louisa County that owns it now. Done.
Is there any discussion about trying to form a congregation or about using it as a church for special occasions like Memorial Day?
So the question is, basically, what is the future? Have we talked about reforming a congregation? What can it be used for? We have discussed reforming a congregation. I think we have put that aside in talking with other pastors and other churches in the area. They feel that they are losing congregants, and with the unspoken being, please don't form something else that will pull more of our congregants away. We do have many ideas for special event services. Periodically, we'd love to do a homecoming annually. one of my Fairview Preservation people is a poet. She would love to have a poetry reading. We'd love to do some art shows there. We have kind of all kinds of ideas. If we could do even just one event a month to keep it going and keep people coming out and keep it in good shape so it doesn't fall into disrepair again.
How far is it from Wapello?
It's about 7 miles south of Wapello. If you know the area, it's Highway 61 goes down and takes you through Wapello, and then you get 7 miles south and you take a left-hand turn and it's just right on a little county highway there. Yes.
I don't know that this is not much of an analogy, but there was a church south of Tipton called South Bethel United Methodist Church, and most of the attendees or members were farmers, country people. Over the years, as they got older, they went to the town of Tipton, but out of loyalty, they still came south about 7 miles to the church. Now, I was moonlighting, but I was pastor of that church for 5 years, and I quit. People were wonderful, but I had enough to do with the university that I really needed to stop. And during my 5 years, one of the distinctions of the church was that we continually lost members. That was partly the case because some of the kids who grew up on farms did not want to go into farming.
Oh, sure.
But so the most active thing about the church finally was the cemetery. However, they raised some money and they had to clear some things when there was some overhead wires. But they actually towed the church 7 miles up to the north end of Tipton, which is an historical area. And until now, Ruth and I haven't gone the last 2 years, but they've had an annual homecoming service, and they call usually one of their former pastors back because there isn't a regular church going on. But the traditions, the stories are still maintained. An annual luncheon. I don't know that this can go on much longer, but it's kept the church alive in a small way.
I think that's a good analogy. There is if I just wiggle the mouse, will the picture come back up? There is in the research for the National Register, there is a lot of discussion about the community of Fairview and the people that used to live in the immediate area that the church drew from. And that is primarily, I think, who we had show up at that organizational meeting. And they talk about the traditions of the church and the things that they would like to see happen there. Again, the cemetery, the graveyard, is actually an active cemetery. There was someone buried just this past year. The earliest grave that I believe is there was 1862. Any other questions?
It's interesting. It just happened, my daughter-in-law's brother was just buried in the cemetery that he was talking about.
Oh my goodness.
Really?
For me.
Got a question over here. Yes. How many people does the church hold? That is a great question. I think it comfortably holds, I'm going to say 80 to 100. Uncomfortably, you can probably squeeze a few more in. It's very tiny inside. All of the pews are still there. There are currently 14 pews there. There are 7 that are missing. We think we know where one of them is. Not sure if we'll get that one back or not, though. But I think we will just rearrange the pews a little bit to fill in the empty spots, which will open up some area in the back too, which may make it able to accommodate a few more people with just some open space. Anything else? Well, I know that some of you will have an opportunity to hear this presentation again. Please come back. It's going to be a little bit different every time. I hope it will be a little bit different every time as this process continues on, as we get more things done. And I'm just really excited to see where this goes. We kind of have a 5-year plan right now to finish. Obviously the outside looks great now, but to finish the main level in 5 years. And then we will start on the basement area. I know. Thank you so much.